The wind that swept through Rattlesnake Crossing carried the taste of dust and whiskey. It rattled the warped shutters of the saloon and set the church bell swaying on its rusted chain. The sun was sinking, stretching long shadows down Main Street. It was almost quiet. Almost Dot, then came the scream. Dot, it wasn't a scream of surprise. It was the sound of something breaking, deep and human. It split the stillness, ricocheted off the wooden buildings, and made the few people on the street freeze. In place, a man's voice followed, loud and slurred. "Maybe next time you'll give me a son." The saloon doors burst open, and Mara stumbled out. Her dress was ripped at the shoulder, one sleeve hanging loose. Her dark hair stuck to the blood on her temple. She was barefoot, skin scraped raw from hitting the floor inside. She pressed one arm around her ribs like she was holding herself together. Behind her, laughter rolled out from inside, ugly, drunken laughter. Mara swayed, blinking at the evening light. The ground felt like it was tilting beneath her. She turned toward the sound of running water. The horse troughed at the edge of the boardwalk. Step by step, she reached it, knelt, and plunged her hands in. The shock of cold made her gasp. She cupped the water to her face, letting it run down her chin, sting her split-lipped Dot around her. The townsfolk looked, but didn't come closer. Mrs. Avery, the shopkeeper's wife, paused with a basket of bread in her arms, then turned away. Two cowhands leaned against the post office wall, eyes down. Even Sheriff Lyle, leaning in his doorway, pretended to be cleaning his pistol, because everyone knew who she belonged to. Dot Clayton Rourke, a rancher big enough to fill a doorway, mean enough to empty a room. He'd been drinking, harder since the birth of their third daughter last spring. Folks said every time he looked at those girls, he saw weakness, saw failure, saw a wife who couldn't give him a boy. The saloon doors creaked again. Clayton stepped out. His shadow fell across Mara before his boots did. "Don't think you can run from me, girl," he said, voice deep with booze. "You're mine. You're my—" The hoofbeats cut him off. A lone rider was coming down the street, his silhouette black against the gold wash of the sunset. The horse, a dark bay with a white blaze, moved steady, unhurried like the man riding it, knew exactly where he was going, and had no reason to rush. His hat brim was pulled low, dust caked his boots, and a long rifle rested easy in the saddle scabbard. He pulled up in front of the saloon and swung. Down. Caleb Hawthorne. Even if you didn't know him, you'd know the type. Quiet, watchful, carved from the same stubborn grit as the land. He owned a spread 20 miles west, ran cattle and horses with only a couple of hands, never came to town unless he had to. Folks said he'd buried a wife and unborn child out there on his land. And since then, he'd spoken more to his dog than to people. His boots hit the dirt, and for a second, the only sound was the wind. Then Caleb's eyes locked on Mara. She tried to straighten, hide the worst of the bruises, but she couldn't stop the way her knees trembled. Caleb crossed the space between them in 3 strides. His shadow fell over her, blocking the light. He didn't speak right away, just knelt, tilting her chin up with the edge of his calloused hand. His gaze moved over the split lip, the swelling at her temple, the fingerprint-shaped bruises on her arms. Who did this? His voice was quiet, too quiet. Her eyes flicked toward the saloon doors. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, his gaze went flat. Then he stood, turned, and walked into the saloon. Dot inside. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the sour stink of spilled beer. Men leaned on the bar, cards scattered on tables. Clayton stood at the far end, drink in hand, telling some story about teaching a woman her place. The room went still when Caleb stepped in. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene. Just walked slow, steady, toward Clayton. The sound of his boots on the floorboards was louder than the whispers. Clayton sneered when he saw him. "You got something to say, Hawthorne?" Caleb didn't answer. He stopped 3 feet away, eyes level. Then, without warning, he hit him. One punch. Short, brutal. The crack of fist against bone was sharp enough to make a man flinch just hearing it. Clayton's head snapped back, and his massive body crashed into a table, shattering it. Cards and whiskey glasses hit the floor. Clayton scrambled, blood already running from his nose. "You? She's coming with me?" Caleb's voice was iron. "You ain't." Caleb grabbed him by the collar, yanked him up, and slammed him against the wall, so hard the bottles rattled behind the bar. "I said," he growled, low enough. Only Clayton could hear. "She's coming with me." When he let go, Clayton stayed pressed against the wall, chest heaving. Caleb turned, walked back toward the doors. No one tried to stop him. Outside, Mara was still at the trough, staring at. It ground like she didn't believe she was awake. Caleb didn't ask if she wanted to go. He just lifted her, careful with the ribs, and set her sideways in the saddle. "Hold on." She gripped the saddle horn with one hand, the other curling in his coat as he mounted behind her Dot from the Asrat. Saloon doorway, Clayton shouted something. A string of curses, a promise to come after them. Caleb ignored it. He touched his heels to the horse, and they were moving, dust kicking up in the golden light. Mara glanced back once, saw Clayton's. Face twisted in fury, saw 3 of his men stumbling out to mount their own horses. The town fell away behind them. The land opened up, endless and wild, the horizon burning red. The wind tore at her hair, stung her eyes. Caleb didn't look back, didn't speak, but Mara could feel it. The way his body had gone tense in the saddle, the way his hand rested. Loose on the rifle stock. He knew they were being followed, and he wasn't planning to run forever. The desert doesn't forgive. The wind seemed to whisper. And neither does a man who's just been made a fool of. Night falls faster in the desert than you expect. One moment, the horizon is gold. The next, it's a deep blue swallowing the last light. By the time Caleb and Mara left the last fence post of town behind, the stars were already punching holes. Through the dark, the wind shifted, colder now, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats behind them. Mara could feel Caleb's chest rise and fall against her back, steady, unhurried. His hand on the reins was loose, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that told her he was counting every stride, every mile. She finally spoke, her voice raw. "Why did you help me?" For a long moment, only the rhythm of the horse answered. "Ben, didn't like what I saw? That's it?" "That's enough." They rode in silence after that. The darkness pressed close, broken only by the pale wash of moonlight on the land. Somewhere far off, coyotes sang, their yips and howls carrying across the flats. Mara adjusted in the saddle, wincing as her ribs complained. "You're not much for talking, are you?" A low huff that might have been a laugh. "Talking doesn't fix fences." The sound of pursuit grew clearer. Caleb didn't look back, but Mara could tell he was listening hard. Without warning, he turned the horse off the main trail, guiding it up a rocky incline where the moonlight couldn't reach. The animal picked its way between junipers, hooves muffled in the sandy soil. They stopped in a pocket of trees, the scent of pine needles. Sharp in the cold. Caleb swung down first, then helped Mara slide to the ground. Her legs shook from the ride. "Stay here," he said, moving to where he could see the trail below. Mara crouched, her breath shallow. Minutes later, the riders came, 3 shadows. Against the pale dust, Clayton's men. Their voices carried. "Caleb won't get far. He's got a wounded woman slowing him down." Her hands clenched. The men rode past, heading west. Caleb waited until their hoofbeats faded before coming back. "They'll circle back," he said. "We keep moving." They didn't light a fire until hours later, when Caleb was sure they'd put enough ground between themselves and town. The fire was small, just a flicker among the rocks, but it felt like the only warm thing in the world that Mara sat close, palms extended to the heat. The shadows under her eyes were deep now, her lips still bleeding in a slow, stubborn trickle. "Are we going?" she asked. "My place. You live alone?" "Got a couple of hands on the ranch. They don't talk much either." Mara almost smiled, but it faded. She stared at the flames for a long time before speaking again. "I was 17 when I married Clayton. Thought he was strong, a man who could keep me safe. First daughter came along, and he smiled like she'd hung the moon. Second one, he didn't smile as much. Third one, he didn't look at me at all. Just started drinking, started swinging." Her voice trembled. "Last week, he told me his sister wanted my youngest. Said she couldn't have kids of her own. Told me I'd give her the baby, or else." Caleb's hands, resting on his knees, tightened into fists. "I told him no." She gave a bitter laugh. "Yes, you saw how that went." Caleb was quiet for a while. The fire popped. Finally he said, "My wife died giving birth. Folks in town said my land was cursed. I stopped caring what they said." Mara looked at him, trying to read the lines in his face. He met her gaze only briefly before turning back to the fire. They moved before dawn. The air was sharp enough to bite, and their breath clouded as they saddled the horse. The land ahead sloped toward a river, its surface silver in the morning. Light. Halfway across, the horse slipped on a slick rock. Mara felt the shift, the sudden lurch, and then she was falling. The shock of the cold river stole the air from her lungs. She gasped, flailing, the current dragging at her skirts. Caleb was in the water before she could cry out. His arm hooked around her waist, hauling her back toward the bank. They collapsed. In the shallows, both dripping, shivering, Caleb stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her. "Don't die on me," he muttered, tucking it tight around her shoulders. "I just got used to you." It startled a laugh out of her, breathless and sharp. "You've got a strange way of showing affection." By mid-morning, they were back in the saddle, the sun burning the chill away. The land rose and fell in long swells, the grass brittle under the late summer heat. Mara caught herself scanning the horizon. She didn't see riders, but she could feel them, like a storm building just out of sight. They crested a low hill, and there it was, Caleb's ranch. A neat cluster of buildings in the middle of miles of open range. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, and a line of corral fencing cut a dark stripe against the earth. For a heartbeat, Mara felt something like relief. Safety dot, then Caleb slowed the horse. 3 armed riders sat by the front gate, their horses restless. She didn't have to ask who they were. "Looks like we've got company," Caleb said. His voice was calm, but his hand was already drifting toward the rifle. The 3 riders waited at the gate like vultures on a fence. Their horses stamped and tossed their heads, restless under the late morning sun. Each man carried a rifle across the saddle, but it was the way they sat loose, cocky, it told. "Mara, they weren't here to talk." Caleb reined in a few yards short, the bay horse shifting under them. He didn't raise his voice. "You boys picked the wrong fence to lean on." The one in the middle skinny, pockmarked face, hat tipped backspat into the dust. "Clayton says you've got something of his." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't." See his brand on her. Pockmark's grin was slow and mean. "We can fix that," the tension snapped. Caleb's hand moved a blur toward the Winchester in the saddle scabbard. The men tensed, shifting in their saddles. Back, off. His voice was flat, but there was steel in it. One rider laughed. "Or what?" Caleb answered with the butt of his rifle. The crack of wood against skull echoed in the dry air. The first man dropped from his horse like a sack of grain. The second lunged forward, drawing his pistol, but Caleb was already swinging. The rifle barrel caught him in the chest, sent him sprawling in the dirt. The third man didn't wait to be introduced to the same treatment. He yanked his reins hard, spurred his horse, and bolted back toward the ridge, dust trailing behind. Caleb swung down from the saddle, checked the two groaning on the ground. "Tell Clayton," he said, "next time I won't be so gentle." They rode through the gate. The ranch spread out a head-low roofed main house. Barn to the left, a chicken coop tucked against the fence line. A windmill creaked in the breeze, its blades flashing in the sun. Inside the yard, a couple of ranch hands had paused their work, watching the newcomers with wary eyes. "This is Mara," Caleb said simply, as if that explained everything. "To Mara," he added, "come inside. We need to get ready." The inside of the house was plain, but solid wood floors worn smooth, shelves lined with jars of beans and flour, a big stone fireplace cold for now. Mara's boots, borrowed from the barn, made soft thuds on the planks as she followed Caleb. He went straight to a tall cabin in the corner, opened it, and began pulling out ammunition boxes, checking the chambers on a pair of revolvers. "You expecting them to come here?" Mara asked. "They'll come. Clayton's the kind who doesn't take being embarrassed in public real well." Her fingers brushed the back of a chair. "And what do you expect me to do?" Caleb turned, holding out a shotgun. "This, you ever fired one?" She took it, surprised at its weight. "No." He stepped closer, guiding her hands into position. "Keep your feet apart. Don't close one eye both open. When you pull the trigger, it's going to push back. Hold it like you mean it." She nodded, jaw tight. "And if I miss?" "Then you reload and try again." A flicker of something not quite a smile passed between them. By sundown, the air had shifted. The breeze was gone, replaced by the kind of stillness that makes a person's skin itch. The ranch hands kept glancing toward the gate. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked. Then came the sound of hooves. 6 riders this time. Clayton at the front, broad as a bull, his hat shadowing his eyes. Even from the porch, Mara could see the ugly twist of his mouth. Caleb stepped out to meet them, rifle in hand but pointed low. "Evening, Clayton." "Cut the talk," Clayton growled. "She's mine. Send her out, and maybe I'll let you. Keep your skin." "Not gonna happen." Clayton's eyes narrowed. "You think one man can stand against 6? Caleb's voice stayed level. "I think 6 men ought to ask themselves if they want to go home tonight." The silence that followed was thick. And Clayton lifted his hand. Gunfire exploded. The first shots tore splinters from the porch posts. Caleb dropped to one knee, returning fire with quick, controlled bursts. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, but each shot sent a rider ducking or swearing. Mara stayed inside at the window, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She remembered Caleb's words, "Hold it like you mean it." And when a shadow moved near the barn, she raised the shotgun. Her first shot was too high, but it hit a lantern hanging on a post. It shattered, oil spraying, fire blooming bright and sudden. The flames startled the attackers' horses, sending them rearing. Clayton bellowed orders, trying to regroup. Bullets whined through the air. Caleb moved like he'd done this before. Fire. Shift position. Mara reloaded with trembling fingers, smoke from the burning lantern stinging her eyes. She spotted another man creeping toward the chicken coop, rifle raised. She fired, the blast knocking her back a step. The man went down. Hard. The fight didn't last long after that. With 2 men hit and another's horse bolting, Clayton swore loud enough for the whole ranch to hear. He pulled back, signaling the rest to retreat. The hoofbeats faded into the night. The only sounds left were the crackle of the burning post and Mara's ragged breathing. Caleb stepped inside, setting the rifle on the table. He was sweating, a shallow cut bleeding on his cheek. "You all right?" Mara swallowed, nodding. Her hands still shook around the shotgun. "You did good," he said simply. She managed a small, tired smile. "Didn't think I'd ever hear that. From a man." Caleb's mouth twitched in something like amusement. But the moment broke when he went to the door, looking toward the barn. "Caleb?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They're not done." In the barn, one of Caleb's horses lay still in the straw, blood pooling under its flank. A hunting knife was buried to the hilt in the muscle, pinning a scrap of paper. Caleb pulled it free, his jaw tightening as he read, "She's mine." He crumpled. The note in his fiststock in the dim lantern light. Mara saw something in Caleb's eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just anger, but the promise of an ending. By dawn, the dust from Clayton's retreat had settled, but the weight of what was coming had not. Caleb stood by the corral, hands on the top rail, staring out at the hills. Mara knew he wasn't admiring the sunrise. "They'll come again," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Not here, though. Next time, it's me going to them." Mara felt her chest tighten. "That's suicide. It's choice." He turned toward her, voice low and steady. "Every fight I've been in, every line I've drawn, it's been for land, cattle, gold. Something that didn't matter much in the end. This," he glanced at her, "this one matters." She wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. This was about the kind of man he refused to stop being. The ride into town was long and dry. They didn't talk much, only the creak of leather, the clink of spurs, and the distant call of a hawk. Mara's mind kept replaying the last 2 days in jagged flashes. The moment Caleb first spoke to her, the fire from her shotgun blast, Clayton's shadow in the smoke. Hawthorne's Main Street was waking up when they arrived. Shopkeepers sweeping. Stoops. A dog trotting down the boardwalk. But when Caleb dismounted in front of the saloon, the street went still. Folks knew the look of a man riding in for blood. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of whiskey and stale smoke. Clayton sat at a table near the back, a bottle between him and 2 of his men. The moment he saw Caleb, his grin spread slow, cruel. "Well now, the rancher comes to town." Caleb's voice carried in the quiet room. "I'm here to finish this." Clayton leaned back, chair creaking. "You think you're going to walk in here?" And the rest of his sentence was cut short by the sharp crack of wood. Caleb's rifle butt slammed onto the table, knocking the bottle over, whiskey spilling. "You touch her again," Caleb said, each word clipped, "and I'll put you in the ground." One of Clayton's men rose fast, hand going for his revolver. Caleb shot him before the barrel cleared leather. The sound boomed, echoing off the saloon walls. Chaos erupted. The second man dove for cover, firing wild. Glass shattered, screams rang out, and the bartender hit the floor. Mara stood in the doorway, shotgun ready. She saw Clayton pushing his chair back, fumbling for his own gun. She didn't think she moved. The blast from her shotgun hit him square in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. His gun clattered to the floor. Clayton bellowed, rage mixing with pain. Caleb stepped in, rifle raised, eyes locked. On the man who'd made Mara's life a living hell. "You had your say," Caleb told him. "Now here's mine." The shot was clean, final. The saloon fell silent except for the ragged breathing of the living. Mara lowered her shotgun, her arms trembling for more than the recoil. She looked at Clayton's body, the blood pooling across the warped floorboards, and felt nothing she could name. Caleb holstered his rifle and glanced at her. "Let's go." Outside, the townsfolk pretended not to stare as the two of them mounted up. The morning sun was climbing, bright and merciless. They rode out past the edge of town, the sound of hooves on packed dirt fading into open silence. Mara finally spoke. "What happens now?" Caleb was quiet for a long while. "You keep moving. Don't give the past a place to sit." "And you?" she asked. He gave a faint shrug. "I've got fences to mend. Always will." She studied him for a moment, then faced forward. The road stretched ahead, wide and empty, but not as frightening as it had been days ago. When they reached a rise in the land, Mara stopped her horse. Caleb looked back, brow furrowed. "I just need a minute," she said. From there, the town was a speck in the distance, the ranch a blur of fences and roofs. She thought about the woman she'd been before, all this small, silent, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. That woman had been buried out here in the dust. Caleb watched her, saying nothing. Finally, she turned her horse toward the horizon. "Let's ride. The West's got a way of burning things down to what they really are. Out here, you don't get to keep the parts of yourself that can't hold their own." Mara walked into the fire and came out steel. Caleb he'd been steel for a long time. And maybe that's the thing about stories like this. Someone's always walking away, and someone's always left in the ground. But if you've got the grit to take your own road, well, maybe you'll find a little more sky out there than you thought. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. There's always another trail, another tale, so keep riding with us.